Hey, I'm Garrett. I'm a grad student at UCLA. I'm entering my fifth year. I'm advised by Andrew Stewart, and I'm in the Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences department at UCLA. So, ice shelves around Antarctica are melting and at different rates, and we'd really like to know why the rates are so different and how exactly the ocean's doing the melting. And it's a hard question because ice shelf cavities are complicated places, which I'm sure we can all agree with. There's um, a vigorous submesoscale circulation. This is a wonderful paper from 2024 with a downscaled uh, simulation of the Amundsen, and down to 200 meters, uh, there's a ton of variability, and then as you go to even finer resolutions and you start to think about plume dynamics, there's more and more variability, and so there's these really complicated dynamics and they're happening in these really complicated geometries. So here I have Pine Island in um, Pine Island's bed machine 3 data of Pine Island, and I've vertically exaggerated it by 10x. And you know, the rock is bumpy, the ice is bumpy. There's all these different little pockets of the ice shelf cavity, and so yeah, you have these complicated dynamics happening in a complicated place, and that makes it hard to understand how the ice and the ocean are interacting and what's driving melt. And so Andrew and I wanted to try to um, look at this complicated picture and think of the simplest possible framework that would help us explain the large scale variations in melt across Antarctica. And so we came up with this framework. And here's the summary as best I could summarize it, which is that um, in all ice shelves across Antarctica, the large scale buoyancy gradient is the most important driver of melt. And second, that the balance between basal melt and plania buoyancy loss determines what water enters ice shelf cavities. And so these are kind of gross generalizations and maybe too simple. But Andrew and I think that like maybe from these two simple ingredients, you can start to explain a lot of the behavior we see around Antarctica. And so I'll start with this first statement, and that's actually the first project of my PhD. Um, and basically, we began making this argument about the large scale buoyancy gradient by thinking about a simplest case, like the most idealized version of an ice shelf cavity we could imagine that was realistic, which is a two-layer ice shelf cavity where you have a meltwater plume, which is the white, thin white layer in the ice shelf cavity, and then all the water underneath in red. And then I've artfully added this blue squiggly arrow, which might tempt you to think about plume dynamics and really fine scale processes, but we're actually going to ignore all that, and we're going to think more about what it means that when when you look at the interface between the meltwater layer and the water underneath, how big that its change in depth is between the entrance to the cavity to the grounding line. And so if you do a simple scale analysis and you take representative values for the change in depth of the picnic line and the length of your ice shelf cavity, you get that this buoyancy gradient, just by assuming that there is a meltwater layer, is like a similar pressure gradient to 2 meters of sea level height difference over the same distance. So it's really just assuming that there is a meltwater layer is this massive forcing on your cavity circulation. And so the to extend this or to think about what this means for the transport into the cavity, we looked at this. We took a lot of inspiration from Ken Zhao's paper in 2019 that took this simplified cavity geometry that looks a little bit like this animation here. And so in Ken's model, he sets the north and south interface height. And what he finds is that as you move the north and south interface height up and down, that the steeper that gradient is, the greater your thermal wind shear is. And that leads to a circulation like these red arrows show, where water comes in from the north, crosses the sill, and then goes towards the southern boundary along in kind of this almost S shape. And so Andrew and I thought, well, if you can predict the transport from the north to south in this really simple geometry from the difference in the interface heights, then the big difference in ice shelf cavities is really that interface height difference is set by the depth of your grounding line of ice rather than, yeah, like you just setting the southern boundary. So we're making the same argument that this change in interface height results in a large pressure gradient that drives a boundary current. And so if you assume that that's true, that this thermal wind gradient drives a boundary current, and that boundary current has some heat transport associated with it, you can write out a pretty simple scaling theory, and you can come to this relationship between basal melt in the cavity to the height of your like your non-melt water layer offshore, the stratification between the top and the bottom layer, the slope of the ice, and the temperature of your water offshore. So we have this scaling theory in hand, and we wanted to test it out. So we ran a bunch of MIT GCM models with different resolutions. With one resolution, 2 kilometers, but with a bunch of different geometries. And basically, in MIT GCM, very idealized model land, where we're simulating just the cavity and setting the stratification offshore. There's no winds, there's no sea ice. Our scaling theory did quite a good job of predicting the melt rate from the cavity simulations. And so then we applied our scaling theory using bed machine 2 as inputs for the ice shelf slope and the dominant bathymetric obstacle, and World Ocean Atlas data for the hydrographic data offshore. So that's decadally averaged temperature and salinity, which gives us information about the stratification and the heat content. And we're taking that only from the 2,000 meter isobath. So yeah, quite far offshore. And then we can apply our scaling theory and compare that to satellite derived estimates of basal melt. So on the x-axis here is our scaling theory, and on the y-axis is the satellite measurements. And so broadly, we think it does a pretty okay job. There's a big clump in the bottom left, but it maybe does a good job of saying these cavities are melting slow, and these we expect to melt fast. And what begins fun is that what is fun is you can take our scaling theory and you can break it up to start to understand different things that are driving melt in different cavities. So here on the right, I've broken up our scaling theory by the hydrographic terms, which are the layer thickness, the ocean temperature, and the stratification. And then on the y-axis, the ice shelf slope. And this, in the background, is contoured what the predicted melt rate is. And so what this tells us is that there are a lot of cavities with low slope where even if you crank up the temperature, it's going to be hard to drive really high area average basal melts because you can't sustain a large scale buoyancy gradient in the same way you could if you had a steeper ice shelf slope. And the inverse is true for slopes with for ice shelves with really high ice shelf slopes. Because they have high ice shelf slopes, as you turn up the temperature, they're going to melt a lot quicker. Okay, so that's the first part of our framework. The second is this idea that there's this balance between basal melt and point of buoyancy loss that determines what water enters ice shelf cavity. And so this is really similar to a lot of work that's already been done in the community. There's, for a long time, at least since Jacobs et al. In 1992, been this idea that there's ice shelf cavities are clearly in different regimes. And Jacobs broke this into 3 modes of melting. And a lot of the work I just presented fell into this mode 2 of melting, where water comes in from offshore, goes into ice shelf cavity, and causes melt. But a lot of ice shelf cavities are in more of a mode 1 sort of situation, where there's a lot of buoyancy loss in front of the ice shelf, and you have abundant dense shelf water creation that fills the ice shelf cavity and blocks any water from coming in offshore. And so we kind of wanted to think about how we could extend this or modify it. And the first thing we wanted to think about was to come up with a way to predict which regime an ice shelf was in, whether it was mode 1 or mode 2, or our equivalent of mode 1 and mode 2. And so we consider this we consider the region right in front of the ice shelf front, and we think about the net total buoyancy flux, which is a balance between the melt flux and the plenia flux. And this idea has been explored by a number of people. I put up here this Silvano et al. Paper that looked in observations at meteoric water content in the Dalton polynya to show that melt water is a really important part of the budget that determines whether or not what the buoyancy budget is in front of the ice shelf cavity. And so basically, if you look at that box, if your melt buoyancy flux exceeds your polynya buoyancy flux, you have this regime that we talked about in the first part of the talk, where water flows in from offshore. And on the other hand, if your polynya flux exceeds your melt flux, you have the opposite case, where you have tons of dense shelf water production and your ice shelf is cut off from offshore waters. And I put this pony here because I think Andrew and I are one-trick ponies, which is to say that we think the reason it's different than the Jacobs et al. Framework in some way is that we don't see these as melting, because we think that in both cavities, it's still the large scale it's still the large scale pressure gradient that determines the melt in these ice shelf cavities. It's just what water is being able to enter the cavity is the biggest difference. So are you filling it with really cold, salty water from polynyas, or are you filling it with relatively warm water from offshore? And so we took our MIT GCM configuration, we added a salt flux region that we think looks like a polynya. We dumped a bunch of salt, and we ran a bunch of simulations, and you find, I guess unsurprisingly, similar regimes to what we described. So as you crank up the salt, you go from one in which water is able to flow in from offshore to one where there's water is blocked from entering offshore, and the water inside the cavity is completely sourced from the polynya. Okay, this is a bit of this is a whopper of a chart, but basically on the y-axis is that total buoyancy budget in front of the ice shelf cavity on the x-axis, and on the y-axis is this metric we don't have to worry about that determines whether or not water's coming in from offshore into the ice shelf cavity. And as you can see, there's these two regimes like we set out, where on the right, your melt exceeds your polynya flux and it's connected to offshore. And on the left, your polynya flux exceeds your melt flux and it's disconnected from offshore. Yeah, and so in these disconnected cavities, this is just a quick graph showing that you can apply a modified version of our scaling theory that just it calculates the large scale pressure gradient, but inside the disconnected cavity, so not taking quantities from offshore, and you get pretty good agreement with the diagnosed melt rate. And you can do really fun stuff, like you can solve a system of equations, because obviously this scaling theory is feeding back on the buoyancy flux in the polynya, and that's modifying the water that's entering the cavity. So we're writing this up now, and hopefully it'll be out soon. So we wanted to diagnose this B total for cavities and observations. So we took melt estimates from satellites from Medusa et al. And sea ice production estimates from Nahashi et al. And then I went through every single ice shelf and I tried to categorize from papers whether or not if it was connected or disconnected. And so this on the x-axis shows our calculated buoyancy budget from the observations. And then on the y-axis is the categorization I did by hand. And if anyone wants to look at this chart or disagree with me, that'd be great. And I can send it to you or whatever. Anyways, so if our idea is true that the B total should predict the regime, then everything should fall along this green line. It obviously doesn't. There's a huge amount of uncertainty in the observations and a lot of nuance that we're kind of just completely not considering in our framework, but it looks fun at the very least, I think. Okay, I have 1 minute left. I'll
very good.
Go quick. You can take these scaling theories. You can try to predict basal mass loss from observations in disconnected and connected cavities. Looks pretty good. Yeah, that's the framework. And we're extending that in a lot of fun ways. We've adapted LADI, which is an ice shelf cavity model. We've added a second layer to make fun movies and to think about this in like 2-layer circulation inside ice shelf cavities. And then you can start to think about, well, if we write out the equations for a 2-layer cavity and solve them in the steady state and use finite element modeling to solve the steady state equations, you can start to, from really simple equations with no time evolving temperature and salinity and buoyancy or melt, you can recreate classic patterns of ice shelf cavity circulation by just solving these steady state equations that really are just looking at the large scale pressure gradient. Thanks.